والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Everyone, welcome to another podcast session with Dr. And today we have an amazing guest, someone who is very dear, someone I've learned a lot from personally as well, Dr. Shoaib Malik. Thank you for joining us on another episode of Ladders of Life.
Danik Rowan, thank you very much for inviting us in. I look forward to having a wonderful chat with you, inshallah.
Inshallah. And, we start by just going through your bio, and your bio is long, so it's going to take me a minute, but I think it's important for people. I know a lot of people are aware of Dr. Malik, but those who might not have heard or been taken any of his classes yet, I would like to share just the educational background and as well as the experiential background of Dr. Malik. So educationally, you took two different paths, and maybe there was some synchrony in between, but you got a bachelor's in engineering, in chemical engineering from the University of Bath, as well as a PhD in chemistry and chemical engineering from the University of Nottingham. You also have a Master of Science in Philosophy, Science, and Religion from the University of Edinburgh. Am I pronouncing that right? Edinburgh.
That's right. Yeah, you got
Edinburgh.
it.
Okay,
Yeah,
perfect. And a PhD in Theology and Religious Studies from St. Mary's University. And you also obviously pursued your Alamiya studies as well as other diplomas in leadership, in organization, sustainable energy and conversion, and postgraduate certification in education. Your experiences range from being right now, currently, you're a lecturer in science and religion at the University of Edinburgh, as well as you were an instructor at Mishkah University, where I took one of your courses. You've also served as an assistant professor at Zayed University, a visiting researcher at the Petroleum Institute, founder of a new institution, Academy of Divinity and Science, which hopefully we can talk a little bit about on this podcast as well. And you have various teaching experiences spanning the US, Canada, Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. And just so for our viewers, you wrote a monograph work, Islam and Evolution, Al-Ghazali and the Modern Evolutionary Paradigm. And this was actually recognized from the International Society for Science and Religion, ISSR, in 2022. And you won an award for that. Is that correct? As the foremost academic contribution in the field of science. So there's a lot more on this bio, but I'll let people kind of research you more if they would like to. But subhanAllah, you have a very impressive educational background. And I guess first question for you is, with such an impressive background in these various range of studies, you have PhDs in theology and chemical engineering. What inspired you to switch from, you excelled in chemical engineering, you went all the way to the PhD level, and then you decided to switch your career paths into theology and specifically into the intersection of Islam, philosophy, and science. So what motivated that?
Oh man, I can answer this in a variety of ways. But I'll answer this comprehensively, and I don't think I've answered this comprehensively before. So let's make this a first, inshallah. So the story actually starts when I was in my high school. So in the British system, so I was born and raised in Kuwait, and I was in the British system since day one. And in my final year, we have something called the A levels. These are equivalent to APs, right? Advanced placement. In my A levels, I did physics, chemistry, and mathematics. And I really wanted to go into computer graphics because I was obsessed with games. So stuff like Counter-Strike, like those were like the things that I used to play. Battlefield. For those of you who are in their 30s, you would know what I'm talking about. Now, my mom then said, Shoaib, there's a debate. But just to be clear, by the way, I didn't have a very strong cultural background, Islamic background at all. Like we had a very diluted understanding of Islam, me and my brother. It's just the two of us. And just to give you some context, at 18, I knew we prayed, right? But I didn't know what the Shahada was. I didn't know what Hajj was. I didn't know what Ramadan, what was the true meaning of Ramadan. None of those were explained to me, right? So we just had hearsay Islam, so to speak. And I remember my mom. She was talking about my options for university, and I started looking at university towards the end of my A-level programs. And I said, Mom, I really want to do computer graphics. And she says, Shoaib, there's a debate among scholars, Islamic scholars, about whether drawing is haram or halal. I'm like, oh man. And so I was like, okay. I looked at then my grades. I was very strong in chemistry and mathematics. Like, chalo, let's do engineering, khalas. And, chemical engineering was it. And that was it. That's the only reason why I went into chemical engineering. I had no background understanding to chemical engineering. I had no clue what chemical engineering. I didn't even know what engineering was, aslan, let alone chemical engineering. But I said, "Khalas, my grades are good in this area," so I applied and I got into the University of Bath. And I went to the University of Bath, right? Hang on. So before I continue the story, so my mom said to me, she said, and she prayed for me. She said, Shoaib, because you did this one thing for Allah, Allah will give you something that you would have never expected, right? So she said that to me when I was 18, and I remember that till now. I'm like, okay, fine. So, and I didn't pay much attention to back then. Now, the University of Bath is a 3-year program. So unlike the U.S., we only have 3-year undergrads, right? We have something called an Eng program, which is 4 years, but it's a master's degree in the UK. It's not an undergrad degree. And anyways, so we went through the 3 years. It was a very interesting experience moving from Kuwait to the UK, because this was in 2007. This was the 7/7 bombing. So my parents always were wary with me joining the ISOC or the MSA equivalent, right there. So I never really got into the Islamic studies crowd even there. It was only towards the end when I started having a religious shift, so to speak. I started, thinking about religion a bit more. At the end of my bachelor's, I was the top in my cohort, so I scored the top score, right? And I was dedicated because I knew what how hard my parents were working to get me there, right? So it was not like something I was like joking around. First year, okay, you're probably getting used to it, but second year, literally, books in and out every day. And so, alhamdulillah, I was top of the cohort, and because of that, I got an offer to do a PhD straight from the get go. One of the professors from the university moved to the University of Nottingham. He said, Shoaib, I have a student fellowship if you want it. A fully funded program. Like, yeah, great. Otherwise, I was going to go to Imperial for my master's in chemical engineering. And so I said to my dad, "Are you sure you want me to go for this? Because it means 3 years." So the funding would give me the tuition free allowance. That was fine, but it had no living expenses covered. So I asked my dad, "Are you sure?" He's like, "Yeah, go for it." And lo and behold, it was actually that PhD that changed everything for me. And so my supervisor, who is the loveliest guy on the planet, right? He's one of those few professors who will give you the time of the day. Whether he's busy or not, he will give you the time of the day, right? And I learned that a lot from him. Like he would put his students first. Now because he was an atheist, he looked to me for like questions about Islam, and I had no knowledge whatsoever, right? In addition to that, it was at that point where I felt I was now mature enough. I think I can handle any religious problems. So I started joining the MSA. We call them ISOCs in the UK, Islamic Societies, right? And that really was the game changer. So I remember in the beginning, so I used to be in a rock band. So I had like long hair, I had the chains and everything. And within 3 months of the PhD starting, the beard came out.
Sorry, do you have a picture of that? That we
I do
can
have a
just.
picture of that. I do have a picture of that. I shared with my students to give them a shock factor. They can't believe that was me. So at 21, right? I remember I'm switching so fast. Like the beard came out, the hair went away, the thobes, everything. Like the whole change happened. And my dad got really worried at one point because he's like, Shoaib, kithe ja raha hai? Where are you going, Aslan? So it was a bit of a scare for them, and I understand why. Understandably why. And, remember, international parents, your son is out there, you're worried. You're naturally very, very worried. But alhamdulillah, that PhD became, because you don't have structured learning in a PhD, right? You're not going in for classes. It's just pure research, right? So I remember nerding it out the first year, like literally learning everything I need to do for my PhD program. And then the second year, it was all like experiments. I just had to do experiments. Now that offered me a lot of time to actually study Islam. So I started going to courses. I went to Al Maghrib courses. I went to Al Kothar courses, right? And if you guys, so these are all, US initiatives, right? And they were amazing. Like they were really eye opening. And the first ever course I ever went to was by Sheikh Hassan Qadi. And he really influenced me in that one lesson. It was on Aqeedah as well. And that PhD really just transformed my entire life. I mean, like I knew by the end of that PhD program that I had no interest in engineering anymore. I was in the wrong field. So much so that in the second year of my PhD, so just for context for the American folks, in the UK, you can finish your PhD in 3-4 years, right? It's not a 5-7 year program, right? And so I remember in the second year, I spoke to my dad like, Dad, I think I want to leave the PhD program. I think I want to go to a university, Islamic university like Azhar or Medina, and study. He's like, Shoaib, listen, you're already halfway through. Just finish it. It'll put food on the table. At the moment, I was very frustrated. At that moment, I was frustrated. I was like, no, I didn't want to do this. But looking back at it now, it was golden advice. So I finished the PhD knowing that I had no interest in engineering anymore. I knew I was very good at it. I knew I was able to publish. I knew if I wanted to put my heart into it, I could be a really strong chemical engineer. But I just completely lost my love because of Islam. Not to say that Islam is anti-engineering. That's not the message I want to propagate out there. It's just that I had a worldview shift. And when I am not the kind of person who can do 50-50. It's either in or out. That's it. And so I then moved to the UAE once I finished my PhD in 2014. In the UAE, things are very controlled, and we'll just keep it there for now, right? And as a result of that, I started studying online with various teachers, right? And the most transformative person who really changed me was Sheikh Ali Raki. He's a Maghribi Moroccan scholar, right? And he was the one with whom I studied Arabic, with whom I studied, the Quran and theology. Before him, I studied, the other sciences, Hadith and Aqidah and whatever have you. But Sheikh Ali really was the main figure who kind of changed my worldview. And he's one of those rare scholars who balances everything, right? The spirituality, the Aqidah stuff, and the fiqh stuff, right? And that really kind of transformed me. Now, during this time, I was an assistant professor of the natural sciences. So I was teaching physics, chemistry on my day job. But in the evenings, I was studying with teachers, right? And that's when I just fell in love with Islam. And I was thinking to myself, okay, so I've trained for so long in engineering, right? So I have this science background, and at a very high degree. It's not like just an undergrad I left. At the same time, I have this love for Islam. Can I somehow find a way in putting these two together in a meaningful way, in a serviceable way for Allah, right? And lo and behold, to my surprise, there is a budding field known as science and religion, right? And subhanallah, it was really, really, I was so incredibly lucky that in 2017, the university that I'm in, University of Edinburgh, they opened up their MSc in science religion as an online degree. So I'm like, yes, let's do this. All right. So I did it part-time, right? I did this part-time. And it was an amazing experience, right? It was an amazing experience. But I was very saddened by the degree because it was all Christian-centric. Like the whole program, one of my the strongest criticisms of the program was that it's not where was I? Yeah, so the MSc program started, and I just was disappointed because I got to know how to do science and religion. I got to see how scholars are juxtaposing these two fields together in a very creative way. I just didn't know how to do it as a Muslim. I didn't know what that means. How would I do this as a Muslim? And so that's when I realized that maybe this is a place where I can contribute, right? And so by the end of that program, I asked one of the professors there, Professor Mark Harris. So he was the other big guy who completely changed my life story. Professor Mark Harris was the guy who actually started that program at Edinburgh. And so Sheikh Ali, he was my Islamic studies teacher, and Professor Harris, he's pretty much the main guy who kind of got me to science religion. I asked him, look, Professor Harris, do you think that my work is worth of academic pursuit, yay or nay? He was the one who said, yes, go for it. Once I had that vote of confidence, khalas, I left engineering behind as for research purposes, and I just started researching Islam and science, Islamic theology, and Islam and atheism. And since then, I've just published in these areas. And it has been both edifying and just unbelievable to see the kind of developments that have been coming out of this research program. And I've been able to, alhamdulillah, been able to kind of also develop teaching programs to educate Muslim students around the world on how this field is working. And 5 years later, at the end of 2019, I am now so for context, in case people may not know, there are 3 leading institutions in the world for science and religion. So believe it or not, you can actually go out and do a degree in this, right? So you can do a PhD, an MSc in this area. And one of them is Faraday Institute, which is a body at Cambridge. It's not associated with Cambridge University, but it's a body in Cambridge. Ian Ramsay Center at Oxford, and the School of Divinity at Edinburgh, right? And all of these are Christian-centric centers. For the first time in their histories, right? That one of the institutions has hired a Muslim professor to work on Islam and science, and that is myself. I just got the job a few months ago, right? And so this allows now me to develop the infrastructure for Islam and science. We already have textbooks coming out. We already have a master's degree program coming out in Islam and science that students all around the world can take. So imagine if you're sitting in the middle of, where are you sitting right now, Mohsen? Which state?
I'm in North Carolina.
North Carolina. So if you're
Yeah.
in North Carolina, like, yeah, I wanna now specialize in Islam and science. So you can get a formal qualification from Edinburgh, and so can anybody else in any other part of the world. So alhamdulillah, I mean, like, Allah has blessed a lot, in terms of the pathway that I've taken. But I think it all comes down to that dua that my mom made for me. I really feel that this is her dua. So that's the most comprehensive answer that I can give you about this entire journey.
No, this was great. And subhanallah, like just looking like through your journey, vicariously living through it, right? So many points in that journey where you could have taken another decision, which would have completely shifted your pathway. And it all stems. I mean, it's interesting. Like subhanallah, you are, as you said, the first professor hired at one of these three institutions to teach Islam and science, and to look at this at the intersection of these, of Islam and science, as well as develop, postgraduate programs for this field. And so you're, I think it's fair to say you are at the forefront of this field, right? And you're representing Islam very well, mashallah. And all of this kind of came back to from a choice, like, you wanted to go do video program, or video graphics, and
Games. That was really
games, right, you wanted to do games. And at that point, I just something I was thinking about, like, if you were if you had more of a passion into going and researching different opinions of Islam, right, you could have found an opinion that said, actually, 2D drawings are okay according to this method, or something like that, right? But that would have completely changed your entire trajectory, and would have maybe prevented you from becoming this forefront for Muslims and Islam in this field. So it's just something so beautiful, is like, as your mother said, that quote, if you leave something for Allah, Allah will always give you something better, right? Allah will bless you for it. And subhanallah, this is evident in your life. So
I would, the 18-year-old me would be completely shocked. I'm now 36-year-old me of where I am. I mean, there was no way I had any foresight that this would be the track that I'd be going down.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of people, especially in this generation, a lot of people find Islam in universities and colleges, whether it's undergrad or graduate or even PhD level. And a lot of people have this desire. And I'm not saying like everyone should, completely leave their field and do a career switch. I mean, everyone has their own, decisions to make. But in terms of, a lot of people do have these feelings, right? Where you're studying a program and you think about, I actually really want to study Islam, but they might not have the courage to do so yet. And I think listening to your story provides that courage for those people. And I want to talk, we were talking about Islam and science, and you being at the forefront of this field, I think you're in a perfect position to explain what exactly does Islam and science mean. Because for a lot of people, including myself a few years ago, Islam and science was limited to miracles of the Quran, and where Islam and it's something that is very, you go on YouTube, you'll find tons and tons of videos about this, right? And you ask people about science and Islam, and they'll tell you, oh, did you hear about this verse of the Quran? Now science has proved it. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but do you think that's a very limited understanding of this term?
Yeah. So when we think about science and Islam, we have a popular level understanding, and then we have a more academic understanding of it, right? So in the popular discourse, it's mostly this reference to, oh, look, there are scientific miracles in the Quran. Science came up with that theory. All we find in the Quran. And it goes for everything, surprisingly, but evolution. So so it's almost like super selective. But no, the academic understanding of Islam and science is that we're trying to look at the various interfaces that science has with the Islamic perspective, be it historically. So how have scholars historically looked at science and Islam, right? And there's a lot of work that's being done here. So for instance, in the past 150 years, the Muslim world went through a tumultuous shift, right? Two shifts, in fact. One, nation-state development. Two, the dissolution of the caliphate, right? And so that's how all these nations emerged. There was no such country 150 years ago called Lebanon. There was no such country called Kuwait. There was no such country called, KSA. These are modern countries. None of these had a history more than 200 years ago, right? And so when you see the interlocutors, the intelligentsia, nation state development became strongly linked with science because science became a recognized utility in the education of these countries, right? So that's why we have people like Muhammad Abdu, who's a bit of a controversial figure, Rashid Rida, right? Allama Iqbal in Pakistan, right? So that's why science became a very important conversation partner for them. And so what we're now looking at in the academic space is there is a history of Islam and science in the Middle East. There's a history of Islam and science in Pakistan, India. There's a history of Islam and science in, Iran. So all of these ideas are being excavated and people are writing books about them. So that's one conversation, right? The other conversation is, well, what are the challenges, the theological challenges that modern science is bringing out for Muslims to think about? For instance, right, evolution. You and I both know that evolution is a very tricky and a very sensitive conversation. People do takfir over this, right? So that's why that's a question. How can we accept evolution? Can we not accept evolution? Why? Why not? Those are the questions that come out of that particular conversation. Quantum mechanics, the idea that in a very crude sense, the universe, at the very fundamental level, things are popping in and out of existence. What does that mean? What does that mean for us, right? Things like AI. AI is now raising a lot of interesting discussions for us. Can AI, have a sense of consciousness, right? Can we treat it as an agent? Can the Sharia be applicable to an AI, right? So what I'm trying to get at is with every new development, questions are emerging. Questions are coming to the fore, right? More interesting questions that are not so philosophical but practical are the ones where science interacts with our fiqh. So, for example, organ transplantation. What's the yes and no's around that, right? Or euthanasia. Can you pull the plug? Yay or nay? Who can pull the plug? Who's responsible for pulling the plug? Right? And VR, for example, right? Virtual reality. How far can we immerse ourselves into VR? Right? Are there Sharia limits to that? So I feel that as we progress scientifically more and more, right? Which I'm not saying is good or bad. I'm just saying that that's the nature of how science is. It progresses, right? It is bringing out new ideas, new imaginal spaces for us to ponder about. And I think engaging with those is nothing different to what our great scholars of the past did. They looked at the challenge of the day and they engaged with them, right? Ghazali would not be who Ghazali was if he didn't engage with the challenge of the day. Same goes for Ibn Sina. Same goes for Ibn Taymiyyah. Same goes for Fakhruddin al-Razi. So this is just another era that we're in, and the challenges of the day are coming out now from these scientific developments. So you can actually look into one of these interfaces, write articles, write books, write PhDs, right? And be able to move the discourse forward. That's what the field of Islam and science is.
So just kind of touching on that, you mentioned evolution, and I know this is a huge field and it's a controversial field to some extent. As you said, it's something that people are willing to do takfir upon. But at the same time, you wrote a book that was given the prestigious award. So again, you're in a perfect position to answer this question. How did Ghazali, Imam al-Ghazali, handle this question about evolution, or how can he help us? How can his framework help us in today's problems, in today's evolutionary problem, as they say?
Right. Okay. So right, there are two questions here. So evolution on the one hand, and Ghazali and evolution on the other hand, right? So evolution is a challenge because it is a theory that says all biological life is connected through a long history, and human beings are no exception to that, right? That can come across as very offensive, insulting, particularly for the Abrahamic traditions, because we've had this general notion that we all come from Adam, right? And this idea of being related to other animals, right? Like dogs, like lizards. This can be culturally offensive as well as religiously offensive, right? And and this seems to clash with scriptural narratives, right? Or traditional narratives. So the first thing is, how do we engage with that? Now, in my opinion, if you want to address, and this is not the only opinion, by the way, there are many other opinions on how to address this question. My opinion is that in order for you to address this question, you must analyze it from a theological angle. It is not a fiqh question. It is not something to do with, what is and isn't allowed, right? It's to do with what you can and cannot believe. It's a theological question at heart, right? And so, in my opinion, there are only two filter tests that need to be addressed. If you address those two questions, khalas, you have done the theological assessment. The first question is, can it be metaphysically possible? Now, this seems like, oh, what is this big word metaphysical, right? So, metaphysically, in this context, simply means, given what we know of Allah, can Allah create us through the process of evolution? Yea or nay, right? And according to Ahl Sunnah, it is completely within the power of Allah to create us through evolution. There's no question about that whatsoever, right? Now, why is that an important conclusion to make? Because many people think evolution equals atheism. But evolution intrinsically cannot be atheistic if it is under the power of Allah to do so, right? And the problem with evolution is that it has become associated so strongly with various isms that we cannot even move beyond the needle point to the theological stuff. So when I say evolution in some communities, they think of Marxism, they think of communism, they think of atheism, they think of secularism, they think of fascism, they think of imperialism. Like all these isms come to the fore, right? And don't get me wrong, evolution can feed into those isms, but is evolution on its own a plausible reality, yea or nay? This comes down to the power of Allah. That's it. The second then question is, once you pass through that filter test, is there anything about evolution that contradicts scripture? And here, this is where my book does a lot of work to show what we can and what we cannot accept. And once you've pushed past the second question, right? If it's past both of those questions, then you can embrace it, right? Now, I'm not going to go into the details of my book here because that's a long story to go into. But you can find this out on, what I conclude there. But fundamentally, that's really how I do it. Metaphysically, is it possible? And using certain scriptural interpretive rules, how much can you accept? Now, this links to the second question that you asked me, right? Why is Ghazali important? I believe in order for you to have a clear response that represents Islam, you need to be able to follow a tradition, right? And within Islam, this is just a statement of fact, there are two big traditions in our corpus. We have the Sunni tradition, we have the Shi'i tradition. I am a Sunni Muslim, right? Within Sunni Islam, we then have three madhabs. These are the Ash'aris, the Maturidis, and the Atharis, right? Now, I mostly identify with the Ash'ari madhab. That doesn't mean I say the others are wrong. It just simply means that given my opinions and inclinations and dispositions, I'm mostly inclined towards the Ash'ari framework. Now, within the Ash'ari framework, there are many scholars, right? There's Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, the eponym, right? You have Baqilani, you have Juwaini, you have Ghazali, you have Fakhruddin al-Razi, etc., etc. So you can choose any one of them. I chose Ghazali personally because of two reasons. One, personally, the reason why I am the way I am and where I am is because of Ghazali's works. He really framed my way of thinking personally. Number two, Ghazali is one of the most studied individuals at the university setting as well as in the seminaries. So I knew that his ideas are very easy to access because of those reasons, right? And he's also a very clear writer. Like if you compare him to others, he's such a systematic and clear writer. Fakhruddin Razi is even clearer than Ghazali, but Ghazali is just balanced. I like Ghazali a lot. So that's the reason why I chose Ghazali, right? That's why I chose it, because he's very clear, he's very accessible, there's a lot of material on him. And if we can just take out the way he does theology, both metaphysically and scripturally, then khalas, we can use his ideas and compare and juxtapose them with a modern conversation. And that's what I did in my book. That's all I did in my book.
Alhamdulillah. And so just to follow up on that, I think the litmus tests are, they make sense, right? And I think you can approach any situation, whether it's quantum mechanics, whether it's, ethical questions with AI through this lens. But let's say like someone, a layperson, right, comes to you and says, okay, how should I deal with evolution? How should I deal with quantum mechanical issues that conflict with my religion, right?
Mhm.
Or at least seemingly conflict with my religion. The first question, can Allah, is it metaphysically possible? That could be answered pretty easily, right? Or at least to some extent, simply for a everyday Muslim. But the second question requires, or the second lens requires, a lot of investigation. I mean, you wrote a whole book about this. It's not something easy that someone can go read a Ghazali, or Ibn Sina, Ibn Taymiyyah, or any of these traditions and try to arrive at a conclusion, especially with a good understanding of quantum mechanics or evolution and going into the details of these theories. So, what approach do you think an everyday Muslim can take?
Yeah, this is the hard one, right? Because we are at least what I tell my students is we are living in a knowledge centric economy now, right? Knowledge is everywhere, and many people have podiums, right? That's just the state of affairs. So my advice to all students is one, keep your heart soft. Don't go with a debate mentality. Number one. Number two, keep an open mind. You may be enlightened in the conversation. Yeah. Once those prerequisites are there, then listen to everyone, right? Listen to everyone. Listen to what people are saying, right? YouTube, not necessarily the best place for learning about Islam, but that's now the go-to place for a lot of people. That's a statement of fact, right? People go more on YouTube than they go to durus, right? So because of that, I would say we need to cultivate an environment where people are able to question and think, because that yes sir mentality is eroding. It's eventually going to dissolve completely, right? So people want answers. It's not just because my falan sheikh said so. So my advice to all people is simply this, right? Is that one, always have the ability to understand where people are coming from, like understand. Number two, have the ability to think, right? We are lacking the culture of thinking and being able to question, and I want to cultivate those. Given those, then and particularly, I would say a third condition is learn theology. Really learn theology, right? One of the things that really made my life super simple was learning theology. In the beginning, I was very skeptical of even things like miracles, because when you're stuck in an engineering box for so long, right? You pick up this hidden curriculum that's not necessarily taught explicitly, but you're kind of primed into a way of thinking. So theology clears that up a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. And I'd say that theology, it's one of the reasons why I feel theology is so important today. So important today. With the internet now available to everyone, I don't think we can just say, yeah, just accept that as an answer. That's not going to work. So given the ecosystem that we're in, and given the curiosities that people have, I would say follow that as best as you can. Keep your heart always as clean as possible, right? Be sincere in your search for truth. Keep an open mind, right? And be around good people. Be around good people to ground you, right? Learn theology very, very, very systematically. And then after that, see what people have to say, right? I think that even though I don't like Facebook, I don't like social media, there's a lot of things that you can pick up. You will disagree with a lot of things. That's fine, right? You will agree with a lot of things. That's also fine. But at least have the ability to listen to different opinions. I would say that would be my strongest advice. Because look, not all of us can be, Ghazali. Not all of us are going to sit down. And so that book took me 7 years of research. No one is going to sit down for 7 years. Okay, let's go through book A through book 1000, right? No one's going to do that. So I would say that the best thing that one can do is be practical with your time. Be practical and have the objective clear. What is it that you're seeking, right? Do you want to be Shaykh al-Islam? Okay, tafadal, go to Azhar, go to Medina, right? Or do you want to be, an engineer? Do you want to be a pharmacist and you want to just know enough to get by, right? Or to make sense of things? Then do courses, right? Just pick up. That would be my generic advice to most people. And I'm saying that that's the most practical thing that I can say in the ecosystem that we have today.
And for those courses, inshallah, we'll talk a little bit later about your new institution that you founded. But I wanted to touch on one thing where you talked about, learning theology. And I remember I saw, I think you put a Twitter post, or now it's called X post, about, when you first started being more interested in researching Islam, you gravitated towards the Ibn Taymiyyah framework, right? And now you kind of, switched over to, whether you is it fair to maybe call it the Ghazali or the Ash'ari framework of thinking, maybe, right? Um, how would you classify these different approaches to philosophy amongst these very, I mean, all of these are giants of Islam, and yet they have different approaches when it comes to these issues. So how would you classify them, and how can, do you think that one framework could help in one way versus, like, let's say Ibn Rushd's framework can help in a certain way, Ibn Sina's framework can help in another way, even Ibn Arabi's framework can help in some way? Or do you think that we should just choose one framework, hammer down on it, and see what comes out of it?
Oh man, what a question. I mean, you really gave this some thought, huh? Okay. So I'll first start off what my journey was like, and then I'll answer your question more directly. So in the beginning, I was largely I gravitated towards Ibn Taymiyyah, and it was only because of one reason. It was very circumstantial. The brothers around me were into that, right? So when I started practicing, I didn't know left from right. I didn't know what was what. And so some of the people around me were very strong advocates of the Athari method, or Ibn Taymiyyah. And so naturally, I bought his books. I read Ibn Taymiyyah quite a lot, and he, at least what I read, I found him to be a pretty interesting scholar. And so but then, interestingly, I met another group of people that said Ibn Taymiyyah is a dangerous person to follow. They didn't use the words like kafir, but they said this is a problematic figure. Like, okay, who do you think I should follow then? So then they suggested people like Ghazali, Razi, and all of that. And then when I mentioned these figures to the first brothers, a group of brothers, right? They said, "Oh, this guy's problematic. Stay away from him." Eventually, I started realizing that everybody's a problem for everyone at some point. Everybody's a problem for everyone. So, okay, I need to stop listening to people, and I just need to read. So I'm an avid reader. I read very fast, and I read very, voraciously. And so I remember in my second year of PhD, I went through like 500 books, like literally just reading in and out, in and out, in and out. And the way I would do it was literally like I was playing careful. So what I mean by that is I would read Ibn Taymiyyah, and then I would read a scholar that I did not know. And then I felt trouble, I go back to Ibn Taymiyyah. And so I'd keep doing this strategy until I started feeling comfortable with, okay, this is now a bit of a mosaic structure that we see here. And only and until I started going through several courses and several books did I realize, okay, Islam is not black and white, so to speak. And what I mean by that, in case people misconstrue me, is we have a very rich tradition, right? And I think the problem here is that we sometimes depict Islam in a very black and white way. And therefore, when we see nuances, emerging, we freeze because we don't know how to deal with that. And unfortunately, that's the way a lot of us were taught about Islam. Yeah. And that's a problem. That is fundamentally a pedagogical problem. That our tradition does have nuances. And unfortunately, I think that where we get to see friction sometimes is not realizing that we even have co-valid, nuances. The fact that we have 4 madhabs in fiqh is a case in point, right? We have 4 madhabs in fiqh, right? So even there, which is our day-to-day practice, right? These are our day-to-day practices. Even here, ulama have differed slightly in terms of how they pray. Do you put the hand up here? Do you put it on the sides and whatever, right? And I think that was the biggest obstacle that I had to get over. Instead of understanding Islam as this one way or the highway mentality, you begin to see the road is wider than that. And you only pick that up once you start studying and you begin to speak to different people. Yeah, because even like, I'm not going to mention the name of some scholars. Like in my time, so remember, this is when I was like 18, 25, right? I saw some scholars who were very harsh, right, from certain madhabs. And now they're soft as a cake because, they realize that you cannot take that for so long. You've got to ease it with people, right? And I think that's how I start seeing that when we see all these great figures, we see where they're coming from. We try to understand where they're coming from, and we give them, we do husn al-dhan, the benefit of the doubt, right, where they're coming from, right? Now, some opinions we will say are problematic, so we'll say, khalas, this Ahl Sunnah says this does not exist. We don't agree on this. Okay, khalas, fair enough, that's fine, right? But at least understand where each scholar is coming from, right? So with my own students, for example, we have students who come from a variety of madhabs, right? They don't just come from one. Some of them have literally no clue what a madhab even is. And so what we do is we build up from ground zero, and we build up the tolerance to saying, look, this is one viewpoint, this is one viewpoint, here's another viewpoint. What do you think, right? And I think that's the way to go forward. And so when we have this lay person who's coming across these conversations for the first time, is really help them understand that if you want black and white, there's a way of understanding in a black and white manner. There's a way of understanding. If you want to do that, no problem. But if you really want to understand Islam for what it is, then have the patience to understand their difference of opinions that you will come across them at some point. And that shock factor needs to, I think, be crossed, I feel.
So another thing that we usually hear, and I think this really confuses people, is, we hear these giants' names, and then sometimes with them we hear, for instance, like Imam Ghazali. Actually, he studied philosophy, he studied science, but at the end he was kind of against philosophy. He was against science. Same thing with Ibn Taymiyyah. Same thing with a lot of people. Now, whether that's true or not, that could be debated. But how would you handle someone coming to you and is this true to begin with, right? Like, or did these giant scholars kind of turn away from philosophy? Because that would effectively kind of kill that whole line of reasoning, that we shouldn't be using philosophy to answer these questions, or science for that matter.
Yeah. So I'll answer, broadly speaking. So there are discussions within our tradition in how far we should use logic and philosophy to express our theology, right? And we have so of the three theological schools in Sunni Islam, if you believe yes to that question, then you're most likely going in the Kalami schools, which is the Maturidi and Ash'ari. If you say no, or if you believe no, you're saying we don't need these, not necessarily in a negative way, but we don't need this. We just take the Quran Hadith at face value and that's it. You're most likely in the Athari camp, so to speak, right? And this debate has been with us since the 9th century, right? More than 1,000 years ago. And this debate is not going anywhere. It's going to stick around. So when it comes to now appreciating those modes, I think we have to be clear that our tradition has opinions on both sides. Yeah? It has been. Now, there is a whole debate amongst Muslims, which one is more representative. And I think that is not a useful enterprise. I think that what we should be clear is this madhab says yes you can, this madhab says no you cannot, right? And then see why. But when it comes to now, whether Ghazali, said philosophy is haram, whether Ibn Taymiyyah said philosophy is haram, one thing you also have to understand, that what philosophy means today is not what it meant in the past. Right? Philosophy, what it meant in the past, was specifically the ideas of Aristotle and Plato, right, that were penned down and commented on by Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, right? And so that's a very, very specific definition of philosophy that does not match with philosophy today. Today, philosophy means things like metaphysics, logic, philosophy of mind. It's a big umbrella, right? It doesn't specifically mean the ideas of Ibn Sina anymore at all. And so I think when people are saying philosophy is haram, we need to qualify. What do you mean philosophy is haram? Do you mean that all thinking is haram now? Or do you mean specifically those ideas are haram? Right? Because you see sometimes fatwa, it's like, oh, philosophy is haram, right? All of that. But that needs to be qualified in order to make sense of what's going on here. But to answer now your question more directly, did people like Ghazali and Ibn Taymiyyah and all that, did they say that science is bad and philosophy is bad? Not really, right? Ghazali himself makes it very clear in multiple occasions that anyone who says that these signs are to be opposed is a jahil, is ignorant, right? Because they think that rejecting these is bolstering the Islamic faith, when that's not even correct at all, right? So, and unfortunately, this narrative was cooked up by Orientalists about 150 years ago. That's where it was cooked up. And we are still under the shadow of that Oriental picture. So much so that even Muslims have adopted that narrative, unfortunately, which is a problem, right? Which is a problem. And I think that this is why we need to be educated to re-educate our understanding of Islam. Because I used to hold that opinion. I thought these Islamic scholars are outdated. We don't need to follow them anymore. That's the mentality that I had, and I was completely wrong when I started studying. Completely, I mean, I was proven wrong entirely. I was humbled. So, yeah, I don't know if that addressed your question, Austin.
No, it does, and I know it's a big question, and there's so much nuance to it, and we obviously don't have, hours and hours to discuss this. But I appreciate this general framework, and it really underlying this is have an open mind, right? Have
Yeah,
an open mind and approach things that not necessarily from a perspective of camps, but more so in the perspective of understanding. Like, do we actually understand these people, and do we give them husnul dhun when we think that they might be saying something that we might disagree with? And another thing, at least I personally derive is these are unfruitful debates that have been carried on for centuries, and we're not necessarily going to be getting any answers to them anytime soon, or conclusive answers at least.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and moving forward from, I guess, from centuries old debates to the future, right? I think one of the things that these giants did was they looked at what were the big questions of their time and they tried to provide answers. And so, what do you think are some of the next big questions that Islamic scholars need to be prepared to answer in this realm of Islam and science? Whether it's AI or advancements in physical therapies.
yeah. I personally think that the biggest question of today, tomorrow, if you want to use those terms, is AI. I mean, like Big Bang was yesterday, evolution is now, tomorrow's AI. Some say that maybe even aliens is tomorrow. Because there's a whole discussion to be had about whether there is intelligent life out there, right? And what their characteristics could be like. Could they be smart as us, smarter than us? Could they be spiritual, more spiritual than us, right? Could they have their own revelation, right? Like, are we supposed to give them dawah, like that kind of stuff, right? There's a quote that's been attributed to Churchill, which I'm still kind of sourcing out, but the quote goes to the effect of that if we were to make contact with extraterrestrials and this was made public, it would shatter traditional beliefs because we seem to think we're the most important creation, and that's the question that'll be rubbed the most in the possible manifestation of AI, of extraterrestrials, right? So I would say it's more, maybe AI is the more immediate one because it's now right at our doorstep, but I think maybe extraterrestrials might be the next one after that, or maybe close in position to that. I think AI will foster a lot of questions about agency. What do we mean by consciousness? Because I think we've hit a point for the first time where we have created something that can perhaps supersede our intelligence, right? So the singularity is that point where machines, right, can replicate and surpass humans, right? And that's scary. That's a very scary thought for a lot of people. That's very scary, right? So what are the ethics around that? What are the theological concerns around that? What does it mean for human nature? What does that mean for human uniqueness? I honestly believe those are the next. So my next project is specifically about this. How will AI impact Islamic theology?
And that's some future PhD topics for anyone interested in entering this field. And just to, I know we're coming up on time here, and we want to conclude, inshallah. But one of the new initiatives that you founded, or one of the new projects that you're doing right now, is you founded Academy of Divinity and Science, where you teach some of these courses in theology and philosophy and how to tackle the intersection of Islam and science. Could you talk a little bit about the institute, what the vision is for this, and if people are interested, how can they join?
Yeah. So because of the concerns that we've discussed in this conversation, I felt there was a need to bring forth and make accessible what are known as the aqliyat, the rational sciences, right? And not just directly from the tradition, but also engage it with contemporary conversations. In my opinion, the number one conversations we should be having are related to four subject matters. Number one, philosophy of science. Number two, Islam and science. Number three, philosophy of religion. And number four, Islamic theology. Those are very, very important conversation, parameters that we need to be navigating. And so the Academy of Divinity and Science was born to facilitate that. And we have three outlets in the Academy. I'll start off with what we call the core curriculum. So the core curriculum has basically four courses, right? So these are the four that I mentioned: philosophy of science, Islamic science, philosophy of religion, and Islamic theology. And for each of these, there are four levels. So you do level 1, you do level 2, you do level 3, and you do level 4. And level 1 and level 2 are for, absolute beginners who have no idea and just want to kind of come into the conversations. Level 3 is for intermediates. Level 4 is for advanced students. We just finished, we've had several repetitions, but I've kind of done a reset. So we just finished level 1 the past summer, and we're doing level 2 in the coming semester, right? So everything is based on like an academic term. So in the fall we have this, in the spring we have that, etc. And the idea here is to really help build people up from ground zero to a more advanced level, depending on how far they want to go. It's modular by design, so you don't have to commit to the whole thing. You can do level 1, level 2, then stop, or you can go up to the end. It's up to you, right? And the reason why I did that is because I wanted to be able to have accessible courses where these so-called complicated ideas are demystified, right? A lot of people, unfortunately, they don't even know what philosophy is, right? They don't know what Islamic theology is. So that's the reason why I created the academy. Alhamdulillah, we started about, I think it was October 2023, the last year, and we're now in August. We went from 10 students to 125 students, and we have students from all around the world. Alhamdulillah. And this is just literally me just talking about it on Facebook and Twitter. I've done no marketing for this academy whatsoever. Alhamdulillah, it's just blossomed. Allah has put a lot of barakah in it. So that's the core curriculum, and that's based on a cycle. So once we finish level 4, we go back to level 1. The other thing that we do in the academy is something called standalone courses. So these are courses that are not part of the main curriculum, but we just do like whatever is available based on the teacher involved. So these involve going through traditional texts, for example. Like I'm teaching Sanusi's Muqaddimat. These are his preliminaries to Islamic theology, for instance. Ramon Harvey, he's teaching a course on the differences between the Ash'aris and the Maturidis from a particular text, right? So that's the second outlet. And the third outlet is an annual book club. And this is not like a course, but it's more like an informal, semi-structured book club to help people gain literacy. So we start with a simple book to more advanced ones. This year, the year of 2024, the theme was science and religion. We're just about to finish the third book. Next year, we're doing it on anthropology, which is to human nature, human uniqueness, which intersects with things like AI. The year after, I'm still thinking about what we want to do, but it depends on what interest is there from my side as well as from the student side. And those are the three things that we do at the Academy of Divinity and Science. The website is nearly done. It should be out in a couple of days, inshallah. But that's what it is. It's really kind of bridging this gap between the traditional sciences and contemporary conversations accessibly to anyone, whether you have a theological or a traditional backbone or not. Interestingly, the Academy, we have students that come from professional backgrounds. We have students as well as Alamiya students, right? And they make for fantastic conversations because we fill in each other's gaps. And it's just a wonderful environment. So we support our learning not just with classes but also WhatsApp. So we're constantly conversing. Like just today, I had conversations about the Prophet ﷺ and how he do these retreats, right? And so people are sharing their perspective there. So we are trying to create, suhbah through our community, through this academy. And so it's a very personalized environment where I want people to feel comfortable to ask questions, not be shy, right? And I think, alhamdulillah, it's produced a lot of good effects so far.
And may Allah Azza wa Jal give you tawfiq to continue, excelling not only in this field, but allowing, sharing that knowledge with future, hopefully, students of knowledge, whether, they go into this field or not. But just as a community, I think we need a upgrade in terms of our knowledge when it comes to this topic of Islam, science, philosophy of science, as well as philosophy of religion in general. So on a lighter note, I know you kind of casually mentioned that, you read 500 books. I think that is a feat that most people will probably not achieve in a lifetime. And so that is very impressive, mashallah. But I wanted to ask you, what do you like to do in your free time? And if you have any book, movie, show recommendations that you think really benefited you, whether in this field or just in general, in personal life.
So hang on. So what's the question again? The question is, what do I do in my free time?
Yeah, or like yeah, like what do you do in your free time? And is there any like a book or a movie or a show recommendation that you would like to give?
Right. Okay. So I'm a workaholic. So it's in my nature to work long. I work 100 hours a week. I can be very frank with you about it. So my wife has to actually pull me back to stop working so I can spend time with her and my son. So sometimes I can get carried away. So it's not a good trait. Well, it cannot be a good trait in some circumstances. It's a good trait if you want to climb the ladder very quickly and effectively. But so that's my nature. That's my temperament. I like to constantly work. I don't like to be idle. However, there is a point where I will crash, right? And this doesn't mean I'm burning out. It just means I need a break. So just if you work the computer on high RAM for a long time, it needs to cool down, right? So the way I cool down is actually by watching shows and shows that are relevant. So, for example, just recently I shared the poster of a TV series that I just found out about called Humans, and this is an amazing British TV series that talks that really displays how if AI, if they become prevalent, how might it affect and impact human lives. And those imaginal worlds really provide fodder for my work because they allow me to think more carefully about what could that mean for us as Muslims. So that's the kind of stuff that I do. I watch anime as well. Anime is very, very interesting. I know that many of the older generation they may not know what it is. I thought it was just cartoon rubbish in the beginning. I was very skeptical about it. Then my friend said, "Shoaib, you should watch it. They're very philosophical." So the first one that I watched, and I recommend everyone watch it as well, is called Full Metal Alchemist Brotherhood. That is like wow. I mean the number of questions that come out of that is just brilliant. So anime is another one, and then of course reading. I just constantly read, right? And we actually have a whole like 2 hour a 2 hour video that I did with Paul from Blogging Theology on his channel. So if you wanted to direct your listeners there, that's a good resource in terms of how I read effectively, how I chill out as well, and I go into more details there.
Well, Jazakallah khair. Thank you for the recommendations as well. I know we're kind of coming up on time. We actually went a little bit over. I do apologize. But mashallah, this was a very interesting conversation and I wanted it to continue. So I do apologize for going a little bit over time. But Jazakallah khair, Dr. Malik, for just I mean everything, right? Like not only the work that you're doing for Islam, but also for taking the time to make sure that the people who are the students who are interested in this field, they get the opportunities to excel in this field, and coming obviously on shows and podcasts like these to explain to everybody what the importance of this work, as well as some of the things that we should be looking at within our own communities when it comes to this field and looking ahead in the future. So barakallahu feek, jazakallah khair a lot, and inshallah hopefully we can bring you back, and because there's tons of topics that we didn't go into, and we could have other topics we could have gotten into more deeply. Maybe that's not necessarily wise to do that on a podcast, but I just wanted to say thank you so much, and inshallah I hope to see you again and to talk with you again on these issues.
Inshallah, Sidi, thank you so much for inviting me. And this is just one final blurb before we end the call.
Yeah.
And that is that if any of your listeners are interested in online programs, either in Islamic theology or Islamic science, we now have the ability to do that through Edinburgh, right? So this means that you can do it by distance. And I'm hopefully developing a few programs that can really, change the landscape a little bit. So if you are interested, please do reach out. I'd be happy to talk with you, inshallah.
Inshallah. And is there a way that they could reach out to you? Just like maybe visit your page on the University of Edinburgh, or
Yeah. So I don't know why people find this to be such like a mystery, right? Like people say, Dr. Shoaib, how can I contact you? So every university professor's email is on the university website. It's not like a hidden, Alibaba cave mystery. It's there. So please just go to the university's website, and there's a faculty page. You can just search, and you'll be able to find my email address. I unfortunately, for the life of me, I cannot keep up with Facebook chat anymore. I just do not respond, right? Even Twitter, I just don't respond. This is not something that is practical for me to do anymore. So please reach out to me via email, inshallah.
sounds good, inshallah. And that's a good advice for any person, or at least for any person affiliated with a university, for their contact information. So jazakallah khair, Dr. Malik, and assalamu alaikum to everybody listening to this. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in walhamdulillahi rabbil alamin.